right.
We can take a seat. I'm delighted to see you all this afternoon for something a little bit different than what we've done before. So welcome to our third Teaching and Learning Workshop of the year. And I would like to, first of all, express my deep appreciation to Katie for suggesting this and then for spearheading this and recruiting 5 intrepid colleagues to present. And thank you so much for all of you who've taken on this a bit challenging format to speak about your scholarship in 20 slides for 20 seconds each. So we will all be a very compassionate and encouraging audience, right? Anyway, this is supposed to be very participatory, and Katie's going to talk to you about that when she speaks in just a moment. But in any case, so I'd like to recognize the participants. Obviously Katie, as I've said, Anindo, Carrie, Kelsey, Jamie, and Mark. And as far as that, I would just like to give the floor to Katie, who will speak a little bit about the format.
Great. Thank you all for coming and giving us part of your Friday afternoon. The nice thing about this, as Linda mentioned, is that it is very brief. This is based on a presentation style called Pecha-Kucha, which, I'm sorry, I don't speak Japanese, but I'm told is Japanese for girlish chatter. And it originated in Tokyo. An architectural firm there started it as a means of sharing work in progress in a format that was a little less formal and abbreviated from a job talk. So it's kind of like an elevator pitch, and I thought it would be a great way for us to share a little more informally some of the scholarship that we're working on. A big part of this event we hope will be that in between, we'll do 2 presentations, we'll have a break, we'll do 2 presentations, we'll have a break. We would like you to get up during the breaks and mingle. We have socially lubricating beverages here towards that purpose. And we really hope that this can be kind of laying the groundwork for cross-pollination and cross-disciplines and just sort of knowing what your colleagues are up to in their non-teaching lives. So, Pecha-Kucha is a sort of trademark name. In order to be a Pecha-Kucha event, you have to host 4 events a year. So our event is 20 by 20 by 6, reflecting the 20 slides, 20 seconds, 6 faculty members. So that's about it. But I'll be back here again encouraging you to mingle, and then I'll also be calling you back to your seats when it's time to do the next presentation. Okay. Jamie? Would you?
Okay. You ready?
Jamie's going to introduce me.
Katie Ries will talk about the Land Scouts, a project that combines art, design, and social interactions to promote ideas of ecology and land stewardship to modern.
So as Jamie said, I'm going to talk about the Land Scouts. This is a project that I started in 2010 in response to the question of how then shall we live? More specifically, the question of what is reasonable for modern urban people when it comes to environmentalism and ideas of stewardship. And then again, how can art and design influence people and change behavior? And so part of my answer to that question is the Land Scouts. I designed these badges and I had them manufactured by a company in New York. Each badge represents a different core value, and for each core value there's a thing you make and a skill you learn, and then you put those into practice to sort of demonstrate your mastery of that skill. Then the gist of the project is that it is democratic and accessible. It's a point of entry into these ideas. It doesn't make you an expert, but it kind of eases you in if you don't know where to start. And it's non-judgmental, it's fun, I hope. It's also pretty low-tech and very affordable, and that is by design. Thus far, the Land Scouts have existed primarily in 2 forms. 2 free camps, 3-day camps for middle school students, both held in Tennessee, and then individual and series of workshops for families. And each workshop kind of focuses on a different badge, and we kind of go through and do it that way. And here is the first badge, observation. All Scouts start with this, and the idea is that we can't know how to care for our land until we know what's going on with it. And more specifically, that we're not responding to what we think is in our land or what we think exists, but what is actually there. We're, it's database, sort of. This is my artistic stab at database research. And it ties into drawing, and that oftentimes beginning drawers draw what they think they know rather than what they see. And so in those cases, learning to draw is actually a function of learning to see. And I think learning to see is about learning to recognize patterns and relationships. And I find that very exciting. I think everyone can learn to draw. Everyone can learn these kind of lenses. I also think drawing is a meditative practice. It kind of creates a contemplative space in which we have maybe a transcendental experience, but certainly something that is stilling and different. And so I want to bring that to the idea of land and one's experience of it, again within this sort of democratic context. So how we do that with the Land Scouts and the observation badge is we find very small field books, we take them out in the world, and we fill them up with our observations, written and drawn observations. The focus is on quantity over quality. I do provide a limited vocabulary to the Scouts, so things like texture and scale and color. But again, it's not about binomial nomenclature or mastering this knowledge. It's about curiosity being an empowering point of departure and a point of entry into these ideas. And so to review just observation, we're going out in the world, we're pausing, we're having this experience, and then we come back and we reflect on it. And my hope is that that reflection lays a groundwork for a more complex understanding of the things that contribute to ecology, environmental degradation, or health. Yeah, so just that's the point of entry. All Scouts start with observation. After you earn the observation badge, you do the rest in whatever order makes sense for your season or resources. And at this point, I hope you're saying, how do I join? And you pretty much say the pledge and you do the stuff. And I created this with the idea of being for adults. But I found that nobody is really excited about just like reading instructions, doing it on their own. What people respond to is face-to-face interactions. I have a web presence for the Scouts. It is not what it should be, certainly for someone who teaches design. So I'm trying to kind of bridge the gap between the charismatic presentation, where I'm like, Land Scouts, and then the media that lets people do it themselves. And I took a step, what I think was an important step towards that this past year. With a grant from Faculty Development, I produced the first edition of the Land Scout Guidebook. This is a limited edition book. It's an artist book, which means that it's fancy and so on and so forth. And there are 25 copies. They're available for $25 each, which I think is very reasonable for an artist book. And it introduces the Scouts, talks about how to earn the observation badge, and how to host a troop. It is also available online. You have less than 20 seconds to write down this URL. Again, that's, the book is $25, the PDF is free. I would like to see this shared widely. I don't want this to be precious or proprietary. I want it to be out in the world, and I want it to be refined. The next book that I hope to be working on is Decomposition, for the Decomposition badge. You earn this badge by making a worm bin. You keep the worm bin for a year, you feed the worms, you don't kill them, so on and so forth. You document them, and that's how you earn the badge. And in the same way that observation can be maybe a foundation for understanding more complex ideas, I hope that caring for living creatures is a kind of beginning the stages of empathy. These things depend on you. As a side note, these worms come from Nancy Mathias's worm bin. She has a really exceptional worm bin. So if you are interested in worms, you should check it out. It's like a Cadillac of worm bins. Go along. Another thing that sort of future progress with the Scouts is to improve my own practice. And I'd like to be hosting a troop in northeastern Wisconsin soon. Right now, I imagine that it would be on campus. I'm in the very beginning stages of that. I have not approached the appropriate people for permission, but that's what I have in mind. My target audience is 3rd through 6th graders. I find that they have both the literacy and earnestness that kind of fits the project. And I'm also excited about partnering with the students who are running the environmental house in the St. Norbert College garden, because I think the Land Scouts could bring a kind of reflective component to what exactly we're doing with an organic garden at a liberal arts college. Like, what can we learn from this, and how can it be a resource and a tool? Long term, I want to be expanding the Scouts to consider other areas. Right now, it's mostly flora-based. Could we look at water ecology? Could we think about community health as a means of promoting stewardship? And so on and so forth. So I hope that's something that you could maybe be helping me out with. And now, for the last slide, we're going to say the pledge all together, very quickly. Please raise your right hand. I will, to the best of my ability, be a good steward of the land where I live, by cultivating native and edible plants, promoting species diversity, sharing fruits of my labor and knowledge, propagating Land Scouting in varied areas.
Amen.
I didn't see it.
Anindo Choudhury. Anindo will share some of the work he's been doing on the analogy between parasites and languages. And shall I start for you?
Sure.
Okie dokie.
Well, the analogy between languages and parasites is not a new one for linguists, but parasitologists really haven't explored the connection between languages and parasites as an analogy. They prefer to use genes as an analogy. So what I want to do is I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the analogy between languages and parasites. And parasites, as all of you know, live in intimate association with their hosts. And this intimate association is long and enduring. And why isn't the slide? That's more than 20 seconds.
Okay,
Great.
let's advance. Here we go. I'll count.
All right. Let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
All
Here we go.
Went from a professional to a complete novice. Okay. The analogy between languages and parasites is not something that is new to linguists. It has been explored by linguists before, but it is new to parasitologists. It has not been explored by parasitologists. Parasitologists have preferred to use genes as an analogy for languages. So what I want to do today is explore the analogy between languages and parasites. And parasites, as you know, live in intimate association with their hosts, either on the host or in the host, and these associations are long and enduring sometimes. What I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about these associations and make you aware that parasites, even though these associations can be long and enduring, they are biological organisms. In other words, they grow, they live, they reproduce, and they produce progeny, and then they die. So all good things come to an end into the most intimate of associations. Well, what I do in my work is I actually look at fish parasites as model systems to understand how parasites and hosts co-evolve, how they relate to one another, what their pathology is, and all these sorts of things, why they are, where they are, and in association that they are. So I'm going to take that approach here to understanding how languages can be viewed as parasites. The fact that languages are organisms is a very old idea. It goes back to von Humboldt, it goes back to Schlegel. It actually was then developed by August Schleicher, even before Darwin published his book on the origin of species. In more modern times, the idea of language as organisms has been revived by Friedrich Cortland at Leiden, University of Leiden, and his pupil, George van Driel. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about their ideas. They look at the languages as mutualists or symbionts, and it's called the symbiotic theory of language evolution. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about that today. Well, first of all, let's look at some of the parallels. Like parasites, a language has to establish itself in every new generation of its host. The symbiotic theory of language says that we are inoculated with language at our infancy, just like a mosquito inoculates us with a malarial parasite. And this inoculation, of course, happens vertically. Okay, that's my mother, and that's me, and I learned German as a kid from my mother. So this vertical inoculation happens from mother to child, or parent to child, father to child. This is a generation-to-generation thing. The language has to establish itself de novo at every generation, just like a parasite does. And of course, there has to be opportunity, i.e. exposure and compatibility, just like happened in Panama during the construction of the Panama Canal, where the malaria parasite was rampant because the opportunity was perfect for its transmission. And the same thing happened with Spanish in Latin America, where the missionaries and other people brought it over. Now, languages like parasites can be acquired from very distantly related hosts, as you saw in the case of the Spaniards in Latin America, the Portuguese in Latin America, and also the British in India. These were distantly related hosts that brought a particular language to that. Languages like parasites can also evolve much faster when they come into new hosts in new areas. For example, there's been a lot of work done by linguists in the rapid diversification of Spanish spoken in Latin America, so that's an interesting parallel. A parasite can also change its host behavior. This is a rather controversial aspect in linguistic evolution, but this is a celebrated case of an ant whose behavior is modified so that it locked jaws around a blade of grass, and the parasite can be transmitted to sheep that then feed on the ants inadvertently while feeding on grass. The question then is, does a language dominate a new people, an area by the dominance of their hosts, of their donors? There's a well-known principle in parasitology called the spillover effect, where ecologically dominant hosts contribute more of their parasites to the community. So In the case of humans, it can be numerical dominance, for example, in the case of immigrants to North America, or in the case of, and here's where I get screwed up. But what about origins and evolution? Victoria Memorial, Queen Victoria was a good example of that. What about origins and evolution? Well, there's a parallel. Just like there is a phylogenetic tree of languages, there can also be a phylogenetic tree or a genealogy of species. This is from Darwin's notebook, that's from Schleicher. And you can see the parallel between there. Well, parasites, because they're in association with the host, have a family tree that can often mirror the family tree or the species tree or the genealogy, so to speak, of the host. So if you superimpose the genealogy of the parasites of hosts upon the genealogy of the hosts themselves, you sometimes get a beautiful match. So the question then becomes, do languages show the same propensity? Do close related people speak close related languages? Well, we already had for the longest time a phylogeny or genealogy of languages that were developed by the linguists, but the problem became not having a solid genealogy for human populations. Well, that problem was actually solved in 1996 by Luigi Luca Cavalli Sforza from Stanford University, who produced his opus magnum called History and Geography of Human Genes, where he actually produced a massive genealogy of all the human populations in the world by taking genetic samples from all of the populations, and it was just an amazing thing. And what he did was he found that there is actually a coevolution between languages and peoples. Close related peoples speak close related languages. So that principle can be found in all kinds of animal hosts as well, in salmonids that host common species of parasites, and even amongst the great apes. We share quite a few species of parasites with the great apes, and those parasites evolved from them. What is a little more controversial is to think about the immune system of the host. Parasites, when they first get into a host and try to colonize a host, have to contend with the host's immune system. And this is where the analogy gets a little controversial and even sometimes difficult or dark. And that is, do languages have to encounter a similar kind of immune system? It is well known, for example, in linguistic theory, that languages actually are able to modify entire neural networks in the brain so as to help their own propagation. The question is, when they're first inoculated into the brain, into the human mind, do they face that same sort of difficulty in establishing? So that is where the research is right now in terms of trying to figure out that resistance. Thank you.